check. All right. Great. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel. And a big thank you to GBBC and Sandra for bringing us all here together today. I think we've just been having so many great conversations and really looking forward to this conversation. First, we're going to go through for each of the panelists and allow them to give an introduction of themselves, what they're working on in terms of their organization, and then what they are working on in terms of the humanitarian piece of this conversation. And we'll begin with Nigina. Turn the microphone on as you speak, please.
I use yours. Technology. Thank you. So happy to be here. I am Nigina Muntean. I am a medical doctor. At the moment, I lead innovation at the United Nations Population Fund, which is also a United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. So our agency is focusing on maternal health, access to family planning, and gender-based violence. And we work in 150 countries and territories, and we do work a lot in humanitarian settings. And I'm happy to be part of this panel because that's a lot to share. Thank you.
I'll use this, it's easier. Hi, my name is Matt Keller. I'm with the Algorand Foundation. And the Algorand Foundation is focused on investing and supporting entrepreneurs and companies who are building on the Algorand blockchain to develop our ecosystem. We were founded at MIT in 2017 by Silvio Macaulay, a Turing Award winner. And the belief is that blockchain technology can be used for social good, for social impact, for financial inclusion, for environmental sustainability. And one of our key focuses is that impact field. What is it that we can do as a foundation to support those entrepreneurs kind of daring enough to believe that they can build with technology to solve some of the world's most intractable problems? And so I lead the impact vertical, and I'm focused on those areas.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Jorge Fernandes, and I am with United Nations World Food Program. We are the largest humanitarian agency in the world. And we basically do a couple of things. We distribute food to those that are mostly in need, but we also distribute cash. It's a big portion of what we do. And we work a lot with local governments, local partners to build capabilities, social protection networks, to adapt to climate change, to address the aftermath of conflicts, and many other reasons that are putting people at peril. I'm sure many of you know, but actually we're living the worst global food crisis since World War II. We have 783 million people that don't know where the next meal is coming from necessarily. 345 million people of those are actually suffering from acute food insecurity and marching towards starvation. And despite being in 120 countries and territories and having 23,000 people working on it on a daily basis, we still face tough choices on who can we help and who can we not. This year, we're targeting more than 150 million people that we can support, but that leaves a lot more that we cannot. But working in innovation, that also means that I'm an optimist, and I believe that science and technology can and should make a dent in alleviating these problems. And we have been playing with blockchain for several years, but also other technologies like AI, deploying innovative finance mechanisms and so on. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion to see how can we scale those further for the benefit of people that need it the most with a leave no one behind mentality.
Thank you, George. Hi, I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. It sure promises to be a wonderful session. My name is Anish, and I am the Chief of Digital Solutions Center, which is housed in another UN agency called UNICC. UNICC is, for the last 52 years of our foundation, we were formed with a forward-looking mandate to support my fellow agencies. You see WFP here, UNFPA there, and as well as about all other UN agencies, with about 100 agencies that we support in the nonprofits in member state. Given our mandate, we seem to be able to work with every one of them. We be able to work with partnerships with many technology companies to understand, how technology can make an impact. Where should we take the UN system to fulfill their mandates? They drive the business. We work with them in creating
their technical solutions, and more than that, I think common digital solutions is the way where we are able to contribute and build on the mezzanine view of innovation that each one of them in their pillars are doing. We get to learn, we get to be able to build. I do believe that, 52 years and running, we solidly are building the member state agenda with which they had formed our agency to say that, let us be able to commonly grow and build the infrastructure, build the capabilities, build the solutions that can serve the humanity better. I do believe that, given the UN's 2030 agenda, we are in the middle of the SDG. We do believe technology is the driver. Secretary General just released the UN 2.0 mandate of reforms, and I do believe, a lot is happening in our space with digital technologies, and like as George mentioned, between AI and automation and data and behavioral sciences and blockchain, we see a once in a lifetime opportunity for being able to innovate and deliver at scale.
Thank you. So we're here today in the name of making progress for global peace and prosperity and economic growth and innovation using technologies like blockchain-based ones, but there's a lot of great emerging technologies that we're very well aware of, especially if you look at the media today. Innovation is a transformative force. So I'm gonna break up the next question into two parts. First with Nigina, what are the greatest needs that need solving in the humanitarian work today? And then Anish, how are blockchain-based technologies being leveraged or being planned to be leveraged to solve those problems? And then, of course, Matt and George, anything else that you can provide in terms of perspectives? So first, Nigina.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear how you formulated the question, what are the needs? Because this is exactly the way we address it. You don't start with the solution. You don't start, what's the greatest technology we can bring to that community that will work? No, we start with the needs. And of course, our agency is focusing on women and girls. So our Innovation Fund Equalizer is delivering technology and innovations to advance women and girls' health, well-being, life, altogether prosperity. And in humanitarian settings, as many of you probably know, women and girls are the most vulnerable one. Children, of course, as well. They have less access to goods, to food, to medicines. They are always more subjected to the sexual, gender-based violence, domestic violence. Poverty hit them the first because then they are off to child marriage and exploitation and many other things which we do not like to see in this world any longer, but it does exist. So starting with the needs, how can we help them? Yes, they are already in humanitarian situation. Not always we have control fully on stopping it or reversing it quickly enough. So we have refugee camps, we have prolonged, protracted refugee crises, we have frozen crises, and still these women and girls are in great needs of assistance on how to make their lives better, safer, their delivery, they still get pregnant. 60% of the maternal mortality is happening in fragile and humanitarian settings. So how can we help them get access to contraception when they need it, medicines, healthcare services? And as I mentioned, sexual gender-based violence, how can we help those survivors of the gender-based violence to get assistance they need? Counseling, cash, goods, money, hygiene products. So these are the needs. These are the needs everywhere, but in humanitarian settings, they're just much bigger and the people, women and girls especially, much more vulnerable. And this is what we are trying to address. Okay, these are the needs. How can we help them with that? And I'm sure we will be talking about the technology because, yeah, in many, many cases, technology can help to address those needs. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure all of us have a woman or girl in our lives that we love very dearly. So it's a very big, hairy problem globally. Anish, what are your thoughts on how we can use this technology to address this problem today or in the future?
So again,
that one. This one's better.
Okay, so we heard Nigina with everything that she talked about from a women and the problems and the needs, basically. And as I just said, as a centralized digital solution center, we work with almost all the UN agencies, not just one, to be able to create those common solutions. I think each one of the UN agencies, and as been described in the SDG agenda 10 years back, and now we are at the center stage, we've categorized those very clearly into the 17 goals that we need to achieve. And they will, if we are able to achieve to the largest extent, we are able to bring a world to a better place. Now, coming back to technology, and we've seen that some of the commonalities, which is the lens through which I work with the UN system, some of the commonalities with which we work, and also on the blockchain and DLT technology, we believe that it's inherently giving us the advantage for financial inclusion applications, whether it's cross-border payments, whether it's financial aid. We do believe there have been wonderful examples. George will talk about, I'm sure you will talk about the Syrian aid. This is there. We've just implemented aid to the Ukraine on the cross-border payments that was done during the Ukraine crisis with the UNHCR for the aid to the needy. And I can talk more about it. We are implementing the same solution now for UNFPA in being able to help their constituents, but we are using the same technology. So again, financial inclusion, trying to take to the unbanked, trying to take it securely to the people where it matters most is the number one use case I see. Almost every UN agency is doing something or the other. Second, and the big one that I see and that we're working with in many cases is climate. You know, the chain is, the DLT technology is really helping us being able to bring traceability in carbon tracking platform and in being able to be net zero by 2050, 2040, depending on how various countries are addressing that net zero issue. The third, obviously, we are seeing between the food agencies as well as many other agencies is traceability of supply chain. You know, again, traceability of supply chain is one of a very big agenda to make a world a better place. We've seen at least half a dozen examples that are happening under that. I can go on and on and on, but I would consider these and one more foundational that we are working with the UN system and the constituents, which is creating a digital public infrastructure for digital ID on the chain. That is something we are working with almost all the large UN agencies right now to be able to create a UN identity and a UN digital identity on the chain, on a private chain, and the UN wallet, which is the foundational with which we can actually start working with other agencies. So I pause here. I mean, I can take more questions, but I pause here at this time.
I have like 500 questions that came up during that. But first, George or Matt, do you have, I guess, on the ground stories that you can share? It sounds like Syria and UK are some stories. And if you have any stories related to the crypto and digital asset part, that'd be great too.
No, absolutely, Harry. And let me start by connecting with what Nigina said before in terms of making our innovations human-centered. And that's very much how we approach it. Let's start with the needs of those people that are most vulnerable first, because there needs to be also readiness to adopt certain technologies, because there's a lot of promise, but we need to make it fit for purpose for those people and the local infrastructure as well. We do have use cases with blockchain. We have the largest use case in the humanitarian sector with our building blocks project. That's what Anish was referring to, which something that started with a pilot with 100 people in Pakistan 6 years ago is now serving 4 million people on a monthly basis with cash assistance in places like Jordan, Bangladesh for Syrian and Rohingya refugees respectively, but also in Ukraine for the coordination and duplication efforts between agencies so that we serve all the people that need and not twice the same person just because we're not coordinated between ourselves. It's a non-crypto based blockchain. It's a private blockchain that we're using, but is helping a lot to promote transparency, traceability, but also driving cost savings that then are plowed back into a system for the people that need it. And this is just an example on how we try to leverage technologies on one side for efficiency and effectiveness of our own operations, but definitely to promote more value to the people that need it the most. And Nigina talked about the importance of favoring women and girls in vulnerable circumstances because they are mostly affected. That is true in the case of conflict. That's true in the case of climate, thinking about smallholder farmers, and there are 800 million of them. But we still see that there are 1.7 billion people that are under or unbanked altogether, not benefiting from the innovation in the financial sector that we see coming through. But with these technologies, blockchain-based technologies, digital assets, there's an opportunity to leapfrog some of the existing systems, and we have started to experiment with that. And we have had a pilot where participants in, let's say, digital training that we were provided so that they would have employable skills and participate in the local market or even transnational market were being paid in digital assets. And that would facilitate a lot their digital financial inclusion, would give them in many ways even the payment history that would be a proxy for credit history. And we had cases of participants that would be accessing crypto loans at much lower rate than otherwise, just because they would have that history that they could demonstrate. But we're looking at digital assets in multiple forms to facilitate our cash assistance programs, trying to get much more transparency, traceability of the flow of funds all the way to the point of use, respecting data privacy, data protection cases. But we're also looking at digital assets as a resource mobilization opportunity. WFP has been kindly supported by traditional donors for many years. We're very thankful for those, but we also know that there are increasing number of crises. So we need to start looking at differentiating, diversifying our sources of funding beyond traditional donor countries. And as we are 100% voluntarily funded, we're looking at private sector and the blockchain Web3 ecosystem in particular as an opportunity to bring additional resources to what we do. And I think we just saw today the announcement of the Food for Crisis initiative that we have together with GBBC, which is aimed at exactly that, mobilizing additional resources, fostering innovation in the assistance space so that we can actually harness the collective capabilities of this community to promote, the inclusion of those that need it the most. And in that sense, we'll continue to be very determined in collaborating with everyone. We call upon everyone to join this, make it a movement, because I think the technology holds a lot of promises, but we need to make it fit for purpose and create the, let's say, readiness conditions so that we can actually deliver on the promise. But we see, some interesting use cases, but now it's about scaling them to have that impact at the necessary level.
Matt?
Yeah, there are a couple of examples where we've invested and supported companies, entrepreneurs who are focused in this space. And I work a little bit with George with WFP because we're really interested in the cash payment part of what they do, because getting that cash into the hands of beneficiaries in a way that's safe and traceable and transparent is really important. So we invested in a company in Afghanistan called HisabPay, which has built a payments platform that allows the movement of money from point A to point B, point A being the United Nations, whether it's WFP or UNDP or whomever, into the hands of a beneficiary in a way, again, that is safe and secure and transparent. And we began to fund that last year, and the London School of Economics did a randomized control study on the outcomes of what happens when HisabPay is used as a payment platform by these agencies. Turns out that women are more likely to be the recipients of aid. When they get that aid, as everybody on this panel knows, good things happen to their families, less violence happens, less corruption happens, and the ecosystem that is created is this kind of virtuous circle whereby everybody, including the UN agencies that take advantage of that platform, benefit because of the immutability of what is on the chain, which means that it is transparent, it can't be changed, it's traceable, and everybody knows what's happening. That's one example that I think is going to scale over time. And we're going to work with WFP and UNDP in Syria and Afghanistan and other places. You know, we've invested in a company out of Harare, Zimbabwe called Flex ID that is focused like a laser beam, Anish, as you talked about, on developing digital identification so that people who are traditionally outside of banking systems and financial services can prove who they are digitally on chain so that they can avail themselves of services and institutions. And finally, there's a company in Dar es Salaam called Y9, which is a mobile phone banking company that uses prescription-based models for mobile phones to introduce a tech stack that allows folks to access banking, access insurance, and whatever else comes on a phone. It could be literacy apps where children can teach themselves how to read, write, and do basic math, which is possible. I led something called the Global Learning X Prize, which proved irrefutably that children left on their own with the right technology, it's dynamic and intuitive, can teach themselves how to read, write, and do basic math. So how do you introduce these technologies into a population where there's demand and where adoption is possible at scale? And that's what we're focused on.
How about taking a step back? I come from the startup tech world. And so we have this concept of a vitamin and Tylenol. And what I heard a lot about is a lot of problem areas that really need Tylenol. Like we just need to solve the pain and the suffering as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But how much of the work is actually like vitamin things that, like another food for thought. I just read the book, The Mystery of Capitalism by Hernando de Soto, right? And so he talks about like here in the US, I have my house and my deed. You know, if anybody shows up with a gun or whatever, like, no, this is my house, right? Like everyone knows. But in other countries, we don't have like such a comprehensive and sophisticated legal system. And so it's not defensible. This is my deed. Oh, another guy shows up with a piece of paper that says it's their deed and so on and so forth. And so they live in a very extra legal system. And so like, to me, that's like a lot of like vitamin work that needs to get done. So how do you prioritize like vitamin versus Tylenol work in this space? And I'll leave it, whoever wants to jump in. Anish.
I'll take a stab at it and then please join. So, I mean, I'll go back to the Ukraine example, which is the Tylenol. We needed to give aid. We needed to be able to use stable coin and be able to get to the person of interest. We needed to reach out to the person of interest. We wanted to make sure that they are able to get through the network, get the stable coin into their wallet. We needed to educate them as well. And then also we needed to do something that you talked about, that we needed to be able to let them know that, you know, you are being displaced. You do not know where your destination is, but you can go to any MoneyGram office and do fiat out and get the cash. And that we needed to do overnight. So we patched all these systems together. It won the Paris Blockchain's Impact Award, because we were able to do cross-border payments to the people where it mattered more, in the currency where it mattered. We're implementing the same solution for UNFPA, for their constituents, women, in various locations at a much larger scale. But that's still a Tylenol, because we've seen a success. We have a template defined. We have a few partnerships in place. We are leveraging that, because policy and regulatory frameworks within our system takes time. You know, they all take time. But when I go back to the vitamin, all of these people, when I talk to them, I said, look, we are building our open stack on digital ID. We have a UN wallet. We are expanding the use cases of that UN wallet for UN to be able to create the open system. We have a couple of building blocks already, private chains already in the system. We should be able to create what is the constituent that is most important to us, the person of interest, whether it's a humanitarian, whether it's a woman, whether it's a child. We need to be able to reach to them. And if we are able to reach it to a tech stack that can be scalable, not just for UN system, but for other least developed countries, we are able to create what is now termed as a digital public infrastructure.
DPI.
DPI. You asked me not to start with DPI. UN is famous for all acronyms. So I set my way for the DPI. The digital public infrastructure is the way to create digital pathways for future. Think about it. The electricity wave that came to our house, we take it for granted. That's how we are going. That's how we see the vitamin approach from a technology standpoint. I'll let others join on this.
No, if I may, WFP is both emergency response agency as well as a development agency. 80+% of our interventions are in the worst crisis environment. So it's all about helping the most pressing needs of the populations. And just, this week, there were these floods in Libya. We are among the first on the ground to respond to this crisis on top of all the other ones. And that is the, let's say, the giant portion of our resources and funding are oriented towards that. But we know that like that will never end hunger, which is our biggest aim. So how do we build development? How do we build resilience and self-reliance in the communities so that they themselves can resist to the next crisis, be that conflict, man-made, or climate, which is increasingly having an impact on all our lives and more so on people on developing countries. So we are trying to promote things like digital financial inclusion, women economic participation, and so on through a series of interventions, leveraging technology, but at the end, technology is only part of the solution so that we can actually equip the people with the capabilities, help the governments build the social protection networks that they themselves can support the next crisis, because we know that we are the largest, but we are 23,000 people, which is nothing in the world. But what we do is collaborate a lot. We have more than 1,100 partners across the globe. And we really call, especially on the private sector, that can lean forward a little bit more in terms of leveraging their competences, making their contributions, so that together we can actually make a bigger dent in these challenges. Otherwise, we will always stay in the till-and-all phase, and we know that that will never get us to where we need to be.
Very interesting. Nigina.
As a doctor, I love analogy of Tylenol and vitamin. As an innovator, for me, Tylenol is almost like a pilot, and vitamin is where we want to scale. And of course, a quick reaction, quick fix often works, and sometimes we even in a rush to implement it as quickly as possible. But again, let's go back to the needs and what's best for this community. Let's take Ukraine, and we're really grateful for this joint project of Keller, UNICC, UNHCR. But we're really careful about not just bringing and dumping the great technology there. We still give an option of how you want to receive that cash assistance. And there might be an older woman in a rural village who is afraid of technology, digital wallets, and who is better off buying a bag of potato in the market without any digital currency. So she prefers an envelope of cash and less steps in that process. And she should have that choice. And there is a younger woman in the more urban settings whose perpetrator is still around somewhere, who can take that cash from her. And she doesn't want to reveal her bank account to anyone. And she wants a full protection. And she should have that choice too. And this is where the blockchain and digital wallets and stablecoins work, and the MoneyGram system. But they should have a choice. And before we even introduce that technology solution, we should ask them, what do you want and how do you want it? If we talk about our collaboration with WFP on building blocks in Dhaka slums in Bangladesh, again, the young women and not young, any age basically who's in need, go for menstrual products, let's say. So they don't get cash assistance, they get the hygiene products. But again, how you design it, that they are not ashamed, not afraid, feel comfortable to go to that particular location and get something which for some is sensitive. It's very personal, intimate hygiene, basically. So design with that woman in mind, with that girl in mind. And be it a Tylenol or when we scale it. And in Ukraine, actually, what we're hearing from our country office colleagues, the government is very interested in the solution. So they're already thinking of how to adopt it and basically take over from the UN to run it at the governmental level, which is for us a vitamin, because then it's being introduced into something much more sustainable and not based on one-off grant that will of course, we all hope for the resolution of the war and conflict there as soon as possible, but that we're building that foundation, which will hopefully work longer and for the larger community. Thank you.
How far away are we actually from like using some of this technology to create the Tylenol and vitamin situations you just talked about? Is it like still one-off right now in Tylenol mode, or are we already working on scalability and vitamin and interoperability and guidelines and standards? Where are we?
I mean, I don't think Tylenol and vitamins are mutually exclusive. You know, I think that you can take both at the same time for short-term pain and long-term gain. And one example is disaster relief in the United States. We've invested in a company to develop something called the Care Wallet, whereby survivors can use their wallet and prove their identity digitally across multiple platforms and agencies to receive the aid they need immediately, but also long-term. As they begin to rebuild their lives, they interface with NGOs on the ground like St. Vincent de Paul and others who provide long-term assistance so that they can begin to put their houses back together. So they're not mutually exclusive, they're mutually beneficial. And those solutions are out there and they're beginning slowly to scale. And I think at some point you're going to hit that inflection point where all the stuff that we're talking about is going to be not worth talking about.
Where are we starting at scale? Like, is it in the most dire areas like a Ukraine or Syria, like where we're working on scale, or is it in more quiet countries where they have more peace where we're going in and working on scale first? Is that a good question? Is there anywhere that scale is now?
I think in places like Afghanistan, they're going to begin to scale on Hesapay and other. I think in places where banking infrastructure is so debilitated, there is an absolute necessity for these kinds of solutions. You're going to see scale happen at a quicker pace.
All right, I know we're running out of time, and I also want to make sure we leave at least 5 minutes for questions at the end. So think of those questions. So it takes a lot of resources to get an organization to invest, you know, not just in the technical stuff, but all the other stuff that's a significant part of the work, right? The procedures, the policies, the who, and all of that. How do you get an organization, whether it be government or a private institution inside any one of these countries, to commit, not just be incentivized? Yeah, I need to solve these problems, but how do you get them to actually follow through and commit to embracing these solutions, whether it be Tylenol or vitamin?
I can give it a try and maybe others can follow. We have a 60-year history of innovation, which is basically the same as saying we need to solve problems every day because we find roadblocks on how we deliver our assistance on the field every day. And the organization has always tried to find the best of technology to do exactly that. But on the other side, we're sometimes too busy with emergency response to try new things. So how do you create a protective environment to experiment in a protective, responsible manner before you can bring something to colleagues that are very, very busy already? So we try to scale, learn fast, and then scale even faster. And that's very much what we've been doing with the Innovation Accelerator for the last 8 years. And now we're happy to say that our portfolio, basically startups that we source from all over the world, but also internally developed projects, like in this case, building blocks, they benefit from the best that it's also used in the private sector. And myself, I have 20 years of private sector before joining the UN. How do we leverage the competencies that, human-centered design, lean startup, agile, and other methodologies to do exactly that? Experiment, learn fast, and then scale faster. And the reality is that you need then to operate at multiple levels. You need to operate at the technology level. You also need to work at the system level, internally, and also with the ecosystem around you. And just this morning, I was participating on our Responsible AI Task Force, for example, because of course there's a big hype around Gen AI and other types of AI and machine learning. How can we benefit that for emergency response? We have a project, for example, with Google on how we leverage AI for building damage assessment, cutting to below 24 hours, what would take us 3 weeks or more to identify exactly where are the hotspots of the crisis. And we're now deploying that in Morocco earthquake and Libya, and we did it in Syria and Turkey before, Pakistan floods and so on. So how do you implement things that are ready to scale, but at the same time protect our colleagues on the ground that are very busy with emergency response. We're not to say, let's do another pilot. Pilot is becoming a charge word within WFP. It's more like, how do we start implementation in a protected environment so that we can then scale and reap the benefits later on? So that's very much how we've been trying to do it.
It's like a lot of art, it seems.
Art and science, I would say.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm going to take a little step back on the vitamin and this example as well. I mean, the fundamental change that everyone has to be involved is driven by the SDGs. Secretary General has been driving that change, that fundamentally how we need to work with member states and different countries to work on these 17 goals that are underpinning all the organization and the larger challenges that we're trying to pitch through every solution. I think we've come a long way, but there's a lot more to be done in the next 10 years. I also see digital cooperation and the future summit that is going to happen is going to address a lot of focus that is happening at the UN level individually and at a common level is to be able to look at digital enablers for future. Now, anything or everything that we do from one smart agency, which has been successful, how can we create an open, scalable, shared solution and then replicate to many similar situations in the UN system? So we've had so many networks and we have got so many internal networks where we collaborate, and in saying, you know, raise your hand and then come forward and say, can I share this? Can I scale this to the next country? So all of those are good examples of how we are maturing in terms of, you know, building scalable solutions using technology, because the pace at which every innovation is happening, whether it's under blockchain, whether it's under AI, whether it's under almost everything that we've seen in the last 3 years, it gives us an opportunity to address those larger challenges.
Can just quickly, for me, scale is really a partnership. The key to scale is partnership. We as UN especially, we of course have a very strong normative and human rights aspect, the UN principles, which we always bring through the initial stage of any innovative project using the frontier technology as well. But we need to be able to let it graduate, so to say. When it's successful enough, proven to be impactful, we need to be able to let it go and graduate and walk by itself. And it's not possible if we don't think about who are the partners in that ecosystem who will be able to take it over and let it thrive. And it's a private sector, very much so. It's also public sector because they come from the legislative framework regulations. We just discussed with panelists before that it's really context related. You can't just easily take one successful initiative from one country to another because it comes with loads of regulations and adoption and other context related issues. So that's why I think we all here, coming from a very different background, working on that partnership element and really thinking. I also think we're not as a UN leveraging the power and ability of private sector enough. The technology, the innovation is driven by private sector, and we need to embrace different modalities of partnership with private sector to really leverage it to the maximum. And I know also WFP is doing quite a lot of initiative. We're discussing what else we can do and experimenting even in a way of how we can form our partnership modality. But we need to do even more here. If we are talking about this quintet of change of UN 2.0, we really can't do it without like variety and diverse base of partners, especially private sector. Thank you.
Just quickly to agree, and it's got to be a multi kind of partner project. Our team in India is doing extraordinary work with private sector, Algorand, with government partnerships. We're having an impact summit in India at the end of November to bring these kind of diffuse elements together to show that these projects work and they mean something to people who are on the margins. So low-income women taking advantage of carbon credits in a way, again, that's non-corruptible and where money, economic benefit goes directly to the women involved. And so proving that over and over and over again, irrefutably, is going to lead to the change I think we all desire.
Amen. We have 5 minutes left, but I'd like to say, like, blockchain related technologies in Web3, it works best when we amplify network effects already in place. And so where we already have communities, wherever we can build those public-private partnerships and work together, the faster we can actually build and towards impact. And I love all that you are doing, and thank you so much for your time today. Let's take 5 minutes to take at least maybe 1 or 2 questions from the group here. Man with a hat, sir.
This whole Tylenol versus vitamin. I think it's it is a useful framing, but when you have regions with real problems, for example, let's track back to the Second World War in the US, or to the let's track back to the Second World War in the US or even other countries. Let's track back to the space program. Let's look at what happened in Africa with the payment systems that came along. All of this was when the backs of people were forced against a wall. They came up with innovation. When there is mature institutions that may not be working as efficiently, there's always a whole coterie of people whose lives and their livelihoods depend on it, and they will be resistant to this change. So, framing this in Tylenol versus, in one context, it may be Tylenol, but only that will produce change. That's what I've seen, but if you have anything more to add on that.
Yeah, the framing of vitamin versus Tylenol was very simplistic. And in the world of startups, like rule number 1 above everything is, yes, you want to be human centric and solve real problems, but that means really number 1, you want to be solving pain points, which is you want to be Tylenol to really affect and bring transformative change. It's very true. Thank you. And okay, more questions. Any questions? All right. Well, thank you to Nigina, Matt, George, and Anish. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to be here together. And I hope more good conversations come out from the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.